Connecticut, she fought to end discriminatory zoning practices that discouraged the construction of group homes for people with mental disabilities in certain communities. Kristen then spent 5 years working for the New Haven Legal Assistance Association, continuing the fight against housing discrimination and broadening her practice to include eviction defense, protection of federal housing subsidies, juvenile delinquency, and child welfare work. She worked to end the school-to-prison pipeline in New Haven, Connecticut, where children with disabilities were being pushed out of the classroom and onto her juvenile delinquency caseload. This is a very common theme of her work and certainly the core of her advocacy, all children can learn. And that brings us to Flint, Michigan. In 3 months, the lead levels of public school buildings operated in the Flint community school system, when measured, range from 61 parts per billion to over 2,800 parts per billion of lead. The population of the entire city, including approximately 30,000 children at home and in school, were exposed to lead, the neurotoxin that is known to impair cognition and associated with a wide range of learning and behavioral challenges. There is no safe level of lead exposure for children. There are an accepted 7 factors that should come into play regarding school suspensions, but many schools take the easy shortcut. Far too many lead-impacted kids have been unfairly disciplined, subject to aggressive school discipline, restrained, excluded from public education, or isolated in special education programs that don't address their true needs. 16% of the more than 5,400 children enrolled in Flint community schools are currently eligible for special education services. A lawsuit was filed that these children are being systematically denied their right to a free and appropriate education. This legal action showed that the state of Michigan and intermediate school districts were failing to provide a safe learning environment, allocate sufficient resources, ensure the availability of necessary personnel, or adequately prepare for the likely increase in special education cases as a result of this widespread exposure to lead. Kristen has a mission to protect and enforce the rights of all children with disabilities and the parents of these children. Thanks to Kristen and the ACLU of Michigan, the children and parents impacted by the Flint water crisis have a safe place to turn for a free neurodevelopmental evaluation to understand the impact of the water crisis on them. Kristen is the mother of 2, and with her husband, Mark, who is a chief legal counsel for Governor Whitmer, we're fortunate to have her here tonight. So please join me in welcoming Kristen Totten.
Thank you so much, John. That was worth coming just for that introduction. My life history, I loved it. So I have a little PowerPoint, so let me just get it going. Anyone?
It was working fine before, right?
It was, yeah.
Press the,
Oh, there we go.
it says display help.
Okay. Will it need a passcode?
Nope,
Okay.
nope, just hit it again.
Okay. Oops. Okay, this is like how it's not on this screen, so I'm like trying to look at it back there and sign it in.
Yeah, just,
Hey, Sam, I'm glad to see you.
well,
Okay.
oops.
I know,
Oh,
right? It's
oh.
not there.
Oh, that makes it really tricky.
What did you do?
Oh, wait a minute, I can see my
You can
finger.
see it? Okay, that's better than I can do.
Good.
That was good eye-hand coordination. Perfect. All right, so I know my PowerPoint is loaded and ready to go.
Oops, is that it? Guess.
Okay. Full screen.
We can, we're a small group, we can see it.
Okay, you can see it, okay. And I'll stand, but then I'll definitely sit down for questions and things. So, the Flint education case, how many of you have heard about the Flint water crisis? Right? Everyone. And that's the beauty of it, is that it's gotten national attention, international attention as well, in regards to what happened. And, you know, I'll give you a brief time, just so it fits in with our case and what we were doing. A lot of those questions that were asked, I might touch upon, but we're really focused on the civil case of redoing the educational system to make sure that it's responsive to the needs of the children rather than punishing and pushing out the kids. So In April 2014, that was the fatal pushing of the button in which the water was switched under emergency manager and utilizing the Flint River. The government said it was fine, keep drinking the water. At times they put out boil water advisories, given the bacteria and Legionella that was in the water that they found. When you boil water, it increases the lead toxicity. So kids were getting it in their formula, they were getting it in their macaroni and cheese, they were getting it in various ways that children do, like we all need water, it's a vital resource. And parents were told, it's safe, it's safe. You know, Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha had been looking at and was concerned about the lead levels, and it was September of 2015 that her report came out, and it was denied by Governor Snyder. Said, nope, that's wrong, bad science, she's like playing into things, but she discovered that the lead rates had doubled in some areas and tripled in other areas within the Flint city. That's what's really interesting. The water crisis hit Flint city, did not hit those surrounding suburbs of Carmody-Ainsworth and Flushing, and I mean, just right there in the city. And it's children that are already struggling on various levels, right? And now we've just inundated them with lead. As we know, lead is a neurotoxin. As John stated, there is no safe level of lead. So what the state did, October 2015, is Snyder finally said, okay, we give in. Dr. Eden Wells, she actually looked at the science that Dr. Mona had utilized and said, okay, yes, it is legitimate, and we need to be advising the public not to consume this water anymore. October 2015, the State Board of Education, now knowing this within our state, said, well, let's get the schools to open up, let's work with the Genesee Health System, let's get the kids in there, let's make this a big thing, like a carnival-like, and get all the lead testing done. So that's where you saw pictures of kids like getting their needles poked into them, sometimes intravenous. Well, I think it was pretty much in the fingers. But you know what's interesting though is that the State Board of Education recommended that happen in October, and they didn't actually do it until January of 2016. Does anyone know, and some of you may be medical people, how long lead stays in the bloodstream?
No, forever.
Yeah, exactly. It's about 20 to 30 days, roughly 28. So by not doing it in October, waiting and not acting until January, you have a false result showing that, oh, the levels are lower.
Who decided that?
Who decided that? That's a great question, and I don't know who decided that in regards to like when are we actually going to do it. Now, the superintendent Tawwab at the time, when Dr. Mona's report came on, he said, let's shut down the water. Like none of the kids are gonna be consumed. He trusted Dr. Mona, and he reached out to the medical community, which there is a great medical community in Flint that is advising superintendents within the Flint Community Schools. They still are without water within their building. So you may have heard, and I'll just fast forward really quickly, but Elon Musk, who had donated $45,000 for all these water hydration stations to be installed, they still have not been installed yet. And we're at 5 years of the water crisis, right? Now, the beneficial thing is that they want to get it right. They want to make sure that this is a state-of-the-art hydration system that has point-of-use filters that make sure that it not only blocks the lead and copper from the kids' bodies, but also bacteria, which we know is very harmful. Obviously, Legionella, 12 people at least have died or are being prosecuted within that. So we were very concerned when we first heard about the Flint situation. Like, I was in my kitchen in Kalamazoo and I was pouring water into my kids' water bottles to send them off to school. And I thought, what if this was told to me that my child's, or that my situation within my kid's school, hold on. Now I know how it's working, okay, so we'll be friends. Okay, so what if my kid's school was showing, can I just go like this, just push on the screen? How can I go to the next
I think
slide?
you have to go on the sidebar. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Like there.
It's really hard to see the arrow altogether. Anybody better at this?
Is there a down arrow? Because it's already on.
There is a down arrow, but it doesn't seem to be.
Hit
Oh,
escape.
it's going there. Okay, hold on.
So I think we need to just go to two.
Yeah, oh, look.
Oh, good for you.
Okay.
Where did it go?
Okay, there you go. I'm losing my momentum. Sorry for those that are watching via video. But what if my kid's school in November 2015 tested at these levels? Right? No level is safe. 15 parts per billion, it was what the federal standard is that's actionable, right? Schools have 402 parts per billion, 326. Terry-Mott, which has the highest level of special ed kids, was at 2,856 parts per billion. And the teachers and the students have been drinking this. And let me just say that Governor Snyder said, we're not going to test the schools. We're not going to test the schools. And you know what? He wasn't legally required to. So this is a terrible thing about our Safe Water Drinking Act. The federal law doesn't require testing in schools. So, and I think the justification is, well, they're on the public water system. Well, we all know that our schools have aging infrastructure, in which there was lead plumbing utilized when they were originally built. Detroit public schools, you may have heard, had very high lead levels. All of their buildings are over 60 years old. And so lead has not really been outlawed in use of plumbing really until 2014. So we have these aging infrastructures and we've got these very high levels. And when we saw these high levels, I was very excited to work with the ACLU of Michigan. They reached out to me because I do special education law. That's what I do. I help kids that have these invisible disabilities that they are oftentimes blamed for what they're struggling with rather than the people being educated across the table, like at an individualized education planning team meeting, to really know how the disability is manifesting in their learning challenges and in their behavior. So I knew when I was pouring the water that there was a big problem in regards to how many kids were going to be blamed for their behaviors and they were going to have to absorb that lead burden, but then also the stigma that comes with not being a good student, misbehaving in class, all of these other things that can really be toxic for kids. So we approached the state and we said, you know, we don't really want to sue you, and we're thinking that you probably want to do what's right for the kids right now. But we had to sue them. So that is where we are at right now. And, you know, lead within a community, it's oftentimes with lead paint, right, in homes. That's how kids usually get it. But water is also a way that they're getting it. And as the Flint water crisis has really cultivated people to understand that it could be in your water, the Connecticut Department of Education really has given a whole flow chart as to what's to happen when a kid has a blood level of 5 parts identified. And if they don't, then you just monitor them and make sure that everything's okay. But if they do have a blood level identified, then you refer them to Child Find under special education. So I'll pause there really quickly. Child Find means under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it requires kids with disabilities to be found. And it doesn't require the parents to say, hey, my kid has a disability. But that's what districts do. And so when you get into communities where parents are struggling, or just, I didn't know my daughter had a speech and language issue until her preschool teacher pointed it out to me. Because she was my first child, and I thought she was developing just fine. And then the teacher said to me, she's not like her normal age peers. She's got a delay here. So we were able to get the services in place and be able to do that. But without people that have that training and that expertise, you're really struggling as a parent just to make sure they get fed and watered and things like that. And it's a hard job, but we need the support. So there's a Child Find requirement, and then they have to say, is there a cognitive or behavioral deficit identified? And this is all for children affected by lead. And if there is not, then you make sure that they have these school-wide academic and behavioral supports, and then you keep doing those developmental screenings. And then if they do have a cognitive and behavioral deficit identified, then you look and say, is this actually a disability? Meaning, is it impairing them in such a way that it's impacting their education? So if it's not, then you apply evidence-based interventions. Those that we know work, but they don't have to be specified to this individual child. Then we look at the response to that intervention, and then we decide whether or not it's really meeting the need of the child. Or if it's disability determined, then we refer for special education.
Because the thing is that kids need to have these school-wide academic and behavior supports. Like, all children get that in a well-run district, right? They get these things called multi-tiered system of support. It's like a triangle. And the tier 1 support is like everybody gets it. It's like my kids have the ROAR rules, which is you're responsible, orderly, attentive, and respectful. So what does that look like in the classroom? What does that look like in the lunchroom? What does that look like in the bathroom? What does that look like on the playground? All kids get those kind of supports, and those expectations are identified. Now, not all kids respond to those tier 1 interventions, and they need a little bit more help. We go up to tier 2, and we do more evidence-based interventions for them. But even those may not work, so then you go to tier 3, and then some kids actually need to be referred on for special education. But what do you do within a school district that doesn't even have that tier 1, right? Where it's in such chaos and disarray, and they're struggling to really be able to give that general education, right? I'm talking about special education, but you've got to have a foundation of education to begin with. Do we have educators? I know Sam is one. Okay, fantastic. So chime in as you will, because if we don't have that base, then we're not going to be able to support the kids. And that's why there are such low reading scores within Flint. That is why they're struggling. I don't know if you saw Rochelle Riley. She's a wonderful, well, former with the Detroit News, but reporter who, she writes about the race burden that people of color have to carry in regards to slavery. And she wrote a great article, and it's entitled, if you want to Google it, it's like, what Snyder doesn't want you to know. So he was talking in a State of the State address saying, like, our reading scores have increased by 70%, we're so great, but it's like, he didn't tell you about Flint, where Flint's actually dropped. All kids are below 11% proficiency in reading. So there's a systemic problem in need of a systemic solution. So what I was doing, I represent individual people, and this is the IDEA, is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, so it's very individual focused, right? But here we realize we have a whole system, because we have a whole community that has been adversely impacted by this lead and is in need of services and supports. But unfortunately, let me get my little arrow back over there. Our state didn't see it. Anyone see the arrow? Okay, where'd that arrow? There we go. I'm really close, right?
Should be able to use the down arrow.
Oh, for Pete's sake. I did try the down arrow. That would be okay.
Try it.
Where am I?
One time you clicked it and it worked.
Right? Oh, see, this is it. Who knew I'd get to play a game tonight on top of? But why won't it go down? What's? Oh, no, I went too far down. I am so sorry. Okay. I need somebody to come up here and do next slide for me. Let's see. Let me see. I really feel like I'm struggling here.
Figure it out.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Oh, look. No, I want to get to number 4 on this slide. I can see the intent there. Thank you. So as you're trying to, at least I can keep talking. I don't want to run out of time. There you go. So the state was not very responsive in regards to addressing the needs. Thank you, Sam.
I'm sorry, I have to giggle because I am definitely impaired here.
I know.
I think I might need tier 2.
Right. I need 2, 3. Exactly. No, it's so true.
Jeez.
So we had to sue the state. We filed it back in October of 2016. We did it under the IDEA. It wasn't just for child find. I mean, that was our initial concern. It's like, you're not even finding the children that are really struggling. But it was also, as John indicated, for discipline and also 504 plans. Has anyone heard of a 504 plan? Our educator, okay, yeah. So those are oftentimes utilized when a kid has a disability. It impacts a major life function. Exactly, that's it. Okay. So you just stay there, Sam. Impacts a major life function, but it's not severe enough to require a special education curriculum or changing to the regular curriculum to make it specialized for that student. What they need is an accommodation. So, you oftentimes hear of a wheelchair ramp for a kid. They just need to get into the school. That is access issue. I also argue it's a behavior plan for a child with behavior problems, because if we don't have a plan to intervene based on evidence validated, we know what works actually in intervening for a child, then what we're gonna do is, we moved on.
Yes,
We
I'm sorry.
Okay, so,
Maybe 2 or 3.
is it possible to go back to number 4? If not, that's okay. So that was a picture. Number 4 had the special education director for this MDE, Michigan Department of Education, Terry Chapman. And we took her deposition within our lawsuit, and you can see Governor Calley. This is at the Michigan School for the Deaf. Michigan School for the Deaf is located in Flint, Michigan. It's on the same water as well. So they have levels at issue there as well. But it was a system of denial that we were getting. So they weren't poisoned, they were just exposed. Well, what's poisoning? Exposure to a poison that you ingest and that causes an adverse impact. Only 49 kids, they were trying to say, because of the blood lead levels, so those only spiked high enough to really implicate that. Only inconvenient for washing or baking. That was asked to Terry Chapman to say, do you think this would inconvenience, or how do you think the lead would impact you if you were in a family within Flint in which that was indicated? Focus on Legionella, like the criminal prosecutions, very important that those are happening. But what about the lead in regards to the kids? That's what we're trying to address. And it's interesting because this whole issue about stigmatization, and in one of our hearings before Judge Art Tarnow, and we filed this class action in the Eastern District in Detroit. Judge Art Tarnow is a wonderful judge, and the defense tried to state, well, Your Honor, we don't know if it's the lead because these families also come from poverty, or if it's something else, and it just really hit me right then. They're making an argument that it's the family's fault, or the child's fault, or society's fault that they're within these conditions, when actually it was the state that inflicted this upon the families, inflicted this upon the children in the school system. So they were saying, we don't want to further stigmatize them by identifying them as special ed needs. Okay, or we don't want to further stigmatize the community. And it is a delicate balance that I really struggle with, because it's where racism and discrimination against people with disabilities really, it hits me every day that this is the reality that we're dealing with. And unfortunately, within school districts, and not all districts, but because we're so under-resourced within Michigan, and I hope the governor's budget is passed in regards to education and infusion of a weighted funding formula, so we give the districts that need more, we give them more. It makes perfect sense to me. But what are we doing in regards to not meeting the needs of those kids? Like, we get to the weighted funding formula, but we're trying to say, like, well, it's the kid's fault and it's the system's fault. So we really need to focus in on not stigmatizing the children, I agree, but we also need to, we can't deal with what we don't acknowledge, right? So we need to acknowledge it. We need to inform parents, and that's where the districts really come out. They say to parents, well, you don't really want your child identified with autism, because if he's identified with autism, he's not going to be able to go into the military. What? Okay. This is a 13-year-old African-American boy who has autism. He's been diagnosed by a medical professional, and you are an educator, and you are saying that you don't want to, if we don't identify it, he's autistic. So he's going to have behaviors related to this autism. So then he is going to wind up in the criminal justice system, because he's going to do something. The bigger he gets, the more threatening people feel about him. And unfortunately, that's what's playing out with some of our cases. And it's heartbreaking to me, because I'm not getting the change fast enough, right? But we are really trying to address this as best we can. But the kids are struggling, the families are struggling with the adverse childhood experience. And those ACE scores, I don't know if you've heard about that, but trauma-informed, it's really the buzzword right now. And it's important to do that, but I think we also need to acknowledge that unlike any other situation, you really can't blame the family for the infliction of the adverse child experience in this situation. This came from their government. The one that was to protect them from these kind of things happening. So we're able to turn that a bit, but it's a struggle, that's for sure. Okay, we can go to the next one. But, thank you, Sam. Yes.
So the cycle towards disability, the stressful event that was caused by the Flint water crisis. I mean, and it's not just that the children are like, I've been poisoned, like they watch the news, they hear the situation, but the struggle that our clients have told me is that seeing their parent, like I have one parent that was just crossing the Meyer parking lot and just fell into a heap because her bones had been deteriorated by the lead. And the heartbreaking thing is she's like, when we knew the lead wasn't safe for anyone to drink, we made sure the kids got the bottles and we, the adults, drank the regular water because we couldn't afford to do otherwise. And that, so they're enduring this, they're seeing their parents getting sick. They're also seeing children that are really struggling and getting sick as well. Like a little girl had an asthma attack. Whether or not that's exacerbated by the lead, I'm not a doctor, I don't know, but those are the traumas that they're hearing about and seeing, and they're just concerned about that happening to them or to their family. So it's a stressful event, and if we don't have the state step in and say, yes, this is, we did this, we inflicted you, we caused this harm, then the kids will internalize it. Just like any stressful event, right? We've all experienced some kind of trauma, but at this scale, it's even more heightened. But we will internalize that distress, and they will hold on and hold on and hold on until someone sees them, right? Here we are. I was just at Cutler County last week for vacation. Got into the mines. This is a great story in regards to like miners and how long the change would be if they would be taken out of, if they would survive the mine collapsing or an entrance collapsing. And they said, if they knew someone was coming for them, they could last days, weeks even, if they just knew someone was coming. If they didn't know if anyone was coming or if anyone knew that they were struggling, they could die in one day.
Wow.
And that's what we're seeing here in Flint. It's like, are you seeing me? Are you understanding that?
Yeah, and the thing about lead too, it's the thing about like crack babies. It's like having a FAS baby or a kid you're working with. You're talking about getting children who are 2, 3, 4 years old who have irreversible brain damage from what's been inflicted upon them. All you're going to do is you're going to teach them to cope with what's happened to them. Not what they were born with, but what's happened to them, what's been inflicted on them. So you've created this whole population of disabled children in Flint and parents who are ill-equipped to deal with the problem. It is a hell of a mess. It is an overwhelming mess.
Yes, it is. I mean,
It's
that's
irreversible.
exactly right.
You're
It's
not gonna fix
irreversible.
them. You're
Exactly.
not going to fix these kids.
So how can we?
How do you make up not fixing your kid? I don't know.
I know, right? And like, how can we switch the narrative in regards to being a little bit more hopeful?
I don't know.
Kids, right? So I think what some folks have done is they just deny. Oh, they're not really poisoned, they're just exposed, right? But then you hear about the preschool teachers that are like, I have never seen kids functioning this low where they can't even, know their letters or their numbers. Yeah, and spell their names and things like that. That cognitive harm has already been inflicted, so we need to help them be able to do it. So we're trying through our lawsuit to be saying, we see you. We know that you're struggling. It's not your fault, and we want to be able to help because we know that if we don't, anxiety, depression is going to set in, and then kids are going to do 2 things. They're going to either put their head down on the desk and shut down and say, I don't belong here, and drop out and give up, or they're going to throw the desk. And so we've got 2 systems. You shut down, mental health system. You throw the desk, juvenile justice system. We can't have these funneling things happening for the kids. We need to be able to give them other ways of doing it. And if you could go to the next one, because they all have a lead burden. And I don't know how many may have seen the Netflix show about Flint cops. It really gives you a picture of Flint in regards to the despair that they're struggling with and what they're having to deal with. Because there's also a stigma that's placed upon this community, and it plays into the racial stigma, right? And that's something that we are trying to make sure does not happen or that it stops on our watch. Because if you can go to number 7, childhood exposure to lead, this is the areas that it impacts. Hearing, speech, learning, attention, memory, mood, behavior, and self-control. And if we're dealing with a system that is functioning like it used to, which is deny,
the level of disability that the child is struggling with. Because if we truly acknowledge, for example, that this child is autistic, we're gonna have to bring in an autism teacher consultant. We're gonna have to bring in more social workers. We're gonna have to bring in other resources to be able to support this child. So what I'm seeing a lot of are speech and language being identified. Because that's easier to treat. Okay, we're gonna get you with a speech pathologist, that's reimbursed by Medicaid through the school, so we'll get you there. The child doesn't just have speech issues. Has memory loss, retention issues, behavior issues. This is all of the areas that lead impacts. And so, as you can see, it is a lot. And the thing about lead is that there's no signature injury. So it can impact one kid one way and another kid another way. And that's the challenge, right? To be able to really identify. So what we were able to do with that lawsuit, here's a little bit of hope, through a lot of struggle, which is we were able to identify the Neuropsychological Center of Excellence. It's called the NCE, it's through the Genesee Health System. So working with Dr. Mona Hana-Atisha, she had developed a screening mechanism for 4 and 5-year-olds, in which they would get a neurodevelopmental evaluation to see where are they actually struggling. Psychoeducational evaluations is usually what's given to kids with disabilities that are being screened for special education. Psychoeducational can have subjectivity coming in. It can be observation of a child. It does have some standard tests and things, but a neuropsychological is really, it's valid, it's reliable, it's been tested over time. It's done by someone with at least a PhD level of psychology, or someone that is under the supervision of that person. So it's really, and it gets to where there could be areas of the brain that are fine, and gets to the area, so we want to know what those areas are, like where are their strengths? Where can we teach to that and really support the child in that, and where they're actually having challenges as well. So that's what the neuropsychological evaluation does, and we filed a preliminary injunction, which is kind of like a mini trial, because we knew that with the state's denial of the situation, we were going to have to be fighting them out in court. So the ACLU of Michigan, along with White & Case, which is a large law firm out of New York City, has dedicated pro bono hours, like millions of dollars worth. I mean, it's so exciting to see people come alongside of the children of Flint, and also the Education Law Center out of New Jersey. So we as a team were able to file this preliminary injunction. We were able to bring some neuropsychological experts that know how to address lead poisoning in kids and how to screen for it. They looked at 8 of our plaintiffs. It was sad because they found the functioning that they found was the worst that they had seen. And that's really hard as you're seeing the kids. And I've gotten really attached to a lot of the kids that I work with because they are amazing. But then also conveying it to the parents and seeing the parents then be thankful, because at least they're like, I knew it. I knew something was going on. I tried to tell the school. They told me he was just being bad and telling me I had to discipline my child more. Mm-hmm. I mean, reinforcing abusive practices, I don't understand, but we were able to get this preliminary injunction by getting the state so we sued the Michigan Department of Education, the Genesee Intermediate School District, as well as the Flint Community School, and we were able to get all defendants to agree to this neuropsychological evaluation. The state put in $4.1 million so we could get it up and running, and now it's supposed to be sustained through Medicaid funding. And that's where we're at right now. Just trying to make sure that the school also does their part and all defendants do their part to get the kids into the system. That's what I'm struggling with right now. Where, like, it's here, it's free. Why are we not, like, getting the kids in there? And it's just really, it shows you just where a community has been so forgotten, so neglected, so pushed aside, that even when something comes in, how it can be, steered away and misguided in there. Oh no, sorry Sam, I was talking too long. So, all of these areas can be impacted, and I just want to touch on, I'm not sure how much more time I have, Jill. How much time do I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. So I just want to tie this picture in with you right now. The rest of the case continues. Although we filed our preliminary injunction, we are going after the state and the ISD and the Flint Community Schools in regards to how they're disciplining the children. In regards to how they're having 504 plans, we've learned that there's only 16 in the entire district. There's more than that in my kids' elementary school in Kalamazoo.
Gee.
So I know something's wrong, right? So, and the thing is about special education in 504, they really play off of parents knowing about it, right? And knowing their rights. And I've represented parents that could afford to pay me, and they didn't know their rights. You trust the educators to tell you what your child needs, right? And then you support your child and work as a team to give the child what they need. In the funding structure that we have right now in Michigan, there's this thing called cross-subsidization, which means special education kids need to have their needs met, and in order to do that, they take it from the general fund, and they cross-subsidize it. So the kids that are, so it's impacting all kids, not just special ed kids, but also general ed kids, and it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, if you will, and it's also pitting people against each other, right? And we're not gonna support those, it's just, it's not the way that it should be funded.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
I think you might have just kind of answered it. I just wondering what the incentive structure is like for the people who run the schools. Do they have an incentive to say, oh, my kids are all fine? The
Yes,
fewer 504
Yeah.
programs they have.
right.
Well, not the teachers, the administrators maybe, but not the teachers.
Right, the teachers are the ones that struggle when the kids aren't identified, right? Because they're not getting additional supports, and then it's put on the teachers, the burden, to then meet the needs of the kids. So it's really,
How does it play out? I mean, for the administrator, why do they get more money if
they don't.
They want to use their money the way they want.
Yeah, and 504 plans, there is no money. I mean, it's
Okay,
because
so
you get
it
federal
costs them
money.
extra money so they don't get to spend on other things.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and it's also with 504 is a federal requirement. It's the Rehabilitation Act, which says if you are getting any federal dollars, you have to be accessible to people with disabilities. It's just what you have to do. And so they try to say, well, there's no money associated with it. Yeah.
No, it's just that IDEA since 1972, since its inception federally, has been a federally mandated plan for special education that not necessarily has been supported on a state level. So they say, state, you will do this. You will accept any child who walks through your door, and if they are identified with blind, deaf, mentally retarded, you will provide services for that person. And until about 10 years ago, there was some matched funding that took place between the federal and the state governments. That ceases to be. So now the total burden for educating, I mean, I had kids, I worked both sides of the aisle with special education and general ed. I had kids who were $60,000, $80,000 a year who were I had one student in my classroom who was in a wheelchair. She never spoke. She had a full-time aide. She went to school until she was 24 years old. And I'm not arguing under any stretch of the imagination that these services should not have occurred for this person. But her education was $80,000. The rest of the kids got $6,700. It's just the money, the resources, even after these kids are identified as, you put a label on a kid and call them anything you want to. You can shove them in a classroom and you can say, general ed teacher, I'm a special ed specialist, do X, Y, and Z with this kid and do it. It doesn't happen. And Flint has never had the services it needed, and it's like somebody came and emptied, like a whole cesspool on top of this. And our illustrious governor is teaching at Harvard.
That got reneged, actually.
Oh, did it? Oh, good. Somebody checked
Oh,
his.
yeah.
I bet he's
The
lying
good
on his
news for the
resume.
evening.
The good news for the evening, that's right, yeah. And then he said, so I just want to point out though that the funding really impacts, there's great inequalities within our state, right? So the Michigan Civil Rights, so data collection, we're looking at it, it's actually civil rights data, the Office of Civil Rights has to take this information, and I believe it's every 4 years. So the ACLU of California actually went through and said, we're gonna look at all of the OCR data, and we're gonna look and see how it's impacting on more of a minuscule, or a micro level rather than a macro, and really see how it's impacting. And here's the days lost due to suspension for every 100 students. And you can just see, and we all know which ones have more children that are majority minority and how that's impacting them. So that, I just wanted to throw that out there, and if we could go to the next one, Stephen. So we have inequality in our, oh my word, I misspelled that, I'm sorry. Infrastructure. This is what happens when you do this on vacation. So Michigan is one of 11 states that does not fund school infrastructure. So if a school discovers elevated lead and copper levels, the ability to the problem would differ greatly, and to address the problem would differ greatly district to district. If we see a problem, we can't address it if we don't have the resources. And this is because school facilities are funded almost solely through local property taxes in Michigan, which has contributed to worsening building conditions in cities with low property values, while wealthier cities are able to build new and safe schools. An issue too is, does my kids, of course, I'm thinking, does Kalamazoo have lead in their water? Are my kids being exposed to this as well? And with the aging infrastructure, most likely they are. They are. But here's the thing about lead. When I was talking to an expert early on about this, they said, lead impacts all kids, whether white, minority, whatever. But what is the difference is if they have a soft cushion upon which to land. That's what makes the difference. There are kids that are in privileged situations that have been lead exposed, but they've got tutoring supports, or they've got, don't tell me my kid's gonna be kicked out of here, I'll just put him in private school before you do. There's cushions that can be given, but when they fall into a system in which there is no cushion, in fact, we're taking the cushion away because it's the poorer districts that are getting less resources, the harder the kid is gonna fall. And so if you look at the next slide, I just wanna highlight a racial disparity that was found in this OCR data, which is black and white girl school arrest risk ratios. So nationally, black girls are 4 times as likely to be arrested in school than white girls. In some states, Michigan, they are 8 times more likely. That's a shameful statistic, and that's something where we've got to really wrestle with our racial history and our implicit bias that clearly is being manifest through how we're treating and teaching our children of color. That is my last slide, so I want to make sure that I open it up for questions, because I'm sure you have quite a few. But thank you for your attention. It's so much fun to talk about it. It's fun, but it's also hard, because I wish I could be giving you more, great news. But when I saw the case, if you want to read more about it, it's called DR versus MDE. So we use the initials of all of our 15 plaintiffs in regards to this, and these are all kiddos with disabilities that either were identified by the school and were being under-resourced, or never identified by the school, and were just being denied that the child even had a disability. So the case continues. We have a status conference on August 23rd. We are currently in settlement negotiations, so I'll have to keep Jill posted, and she can communicate with everyone if we have some good news from that. We have a new administration. Thank God.
I take it from that comment that this new administration is a little more attentive to the needs.
Yes. In fact, Snyder would sometimes send people in to the courtroom or the negotiation table. Sometimes we never knew who they were, why were they there, what was happening. This time we have one person from the governor's office, Office of Legal Counsel, who's coming in. It's not my husband. That would be a big conflict. Flint is the F word in our house. We cannot speak it because of the conflict that would exist there. But there is someone that's wonderful, and she's attending, and it's moving in the right direction that way. But we do have, there's restraints in regards to the money, and we really need our legislature to understand how much they've been impacted. We have heard things like, well, there's Flint fatigue at the legislature. Well,
Oh, too bad.
you know, it's hard with the class actions that are happening. All of those folks really, I mean, I hope that they are able to settle that case. Wonderful attorneys on those as well. But it's like, we have to make sure that the education system is responsive, because if you're gonna rebuild a community, you gotta make sure your schools are functioning well and meeting the needs. And, you know, just talking a little bit about discriminatory practices, kids that, we have this school, it's really school of choice, right? So within county, so under the Genesee Intermediate School District, a kid from Flint could go to Davison, could go to Fenton, could go to, one, you have to have transportation, right? So that eliminates a lot of the people that are struggling with poverty. And you can't have any behavioral referrals within the last 2 years. And so those kids are getting put out too. So like Flint is really absorbing the children that are, you know, very poor, very, you know, are struggling, but man, those parents are so committed to their kids and so committed to getting them what they are entitled to that it's, I mean, it's inspiring to me. It's just sad that it's taking us so long to get there.
How much money would do the trick? Nothing would do the trick, really. But
Right. Well, you know, I mean, it's definitely an infusion of funds for a weighted funding formula that could be sustained across the state. So I think that the governor's on the right track there. And really making sure though too, that it's not, when a district is truly struggling like Flint is, where's the intermediate school district? Where are the resources that should be coming in? You see it come in for like early on, for the 0 to 5, those cute kids. But what about the K through 12? And the whole language of this is local control. Well, we just give it to local. To me, that's not even window dressing anymore to me. I just look at that as a racial statement.
What
Because
percentage
you're
of
willing-
that funding, you said that the state doesn't supply any of the funding for the infrastructure. What percentage of the funding for the operating budget of a school is local, and what, does any of that come from the state?
Yeah, there's state money that comes to the
What,
schools.
do you know what
I don't know what percentage it is. But the thing about special education is it comes from the Fed to the state MDE to the ISD that then gives it to the local district. So this whole local control thing is like when you know that kids are not getting their needs met, you do have an obligation under the law to step in. And to be able to say like, okay, you cannot meet the needs of these children, so we're gonna send in a school psychologist, we're gonna send in a whole team to evaluate, you know, we're gonna send these supports in, but yeah.
I just have a little comment about that. One year I had 3 autistic boys in my kindergarten class. And so from Oakland Schools, which was our ISD, the autistic, you know, head came out and she said to me, you know, I can give you tons of support. And I said, great, you're gonna come and show me what I should be doing? Oh no, you can call me and I said, I didn't even have a phone in my room at that time. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm gonna leave my 28 kindergartners, go down the hall and call you, and you're gonna give me advice? So to me, the ISDs were not the solution. What a classroom teacher needs is people in the room. In the room, especially now since they changed it. It used to be special ed, you had special qualifications, you were trained to do things. Well now, every teacher takes every kid, which was not a good idea because special ed teachers had special training. I actually think education is important. And when you get a degree in special education, you have more than the average classroom teacher has to offer. And now every classroom teacher is supposed to be able to do everything. It's not possible.
No, and our teachers' colleges have not stepped up to really meet that. Like I talked to kids, well they are kids, but when I talk to people that are going through those programs right now, how many special education courses do you have to take?
There you go.
One. And
I didn't have any.
And none.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah.
No, and inclusion started off as a great idea, that a special education teacher would come with the kids. Well, that's short. I mean, they found out real quick that, gosh, you could have one teacher, she could have a caseload of special education teachers, she could have a caseload of 32, and you could shove those kids into 4 classrooms, and she'd stop in at various places, and you could say they were receiving services. So districts have taken that also and played with it, and to the detriment of the kid who was supposed to get the services in the first place, because Sam's absolutely right. You throw 3 kids into your classroom who you have no idea what to do with them, and you're still responsible for the other kids.
Right.
Nobody's getting served.
No, and especially when we're relying upon subs.
Well, and
So
it's
teachers-
declining funds for K-12.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
It just really is.
Very much so. I mean, proposal A was a good experiment, but it didn't work,
Did not
No,
work.
it did not.
Did not work.
right? And so teachers do need to have that extra support, as do the students, as do the kids, so, yeah. Anybody else?
Not being an educator, and my kids have been out of school for a long
Yeah.
time, this is all a shock to me. I mean, it's an outrage that these schools that you expect to be advocates for children are only there for the money. How many other Flints are there out there?
Oh, there's a lot, I mean,
I mean, just in the state of Michigan.
right, and we're the lowest in regards to our reading performance.
Yeah.
And at first there were 49.
I think we're close to Mississippi and Alabama.
Mississippi, I think
15 years ago. That wasn't true.
No, well, I'm on the early childhood committee, and I just
Yeah.
remember going over these statistics.
right,
Yeah, I know, but they've dropped like drastically
But,
in the
like-
last 18 years.
yeah, we're the lowest 49th percent for African American students, and we're 48th for the white kids. So it's like, if you don't raise up, if you mistreat and continue to do this and not address it, then all kids are gonna suffer as they are. And there are so many, I mean, there's Saginaw, Benton Harbor, right, Detroit, all of these areas that are really, really struggling as the charter schools come in, take over, virtual schools come in, take students away. I mean, it's a complex problem, but I'm very excited. Excited may not be the right word, but attention is being given. Studies have been done. There's an Augenblick study that was done and commissioned by the state to say, what do we need to do in order to adequately fund a student's education, right? They did one, and then they didn't take into consideration the special ed population, so they had to go back and do it again. But like they're saying, we're underfunding. Lieutenant Governor Calley, when he was in that position, he had a funding done to look at the special ed funding. We're underfunding special ed by $700 million in Michigan, and that's just to bring it up to like a basic structure. And that's not even like, the other thing that we're struggling with is we are a needs intervention state, which means federal monitoring is done to make sure compliance with the IDEA is done. We are the only state in the United States that is a needs intervention. So it's a really bad thing. And they look at our dropout rate, they look at our graduation rate, and how we are failing kids with disabilities on so many different levels. So I hope that's been a wake-up call to the state to like say, how can we change things around? There's still people in leadership that I'm not sure why they're still there. But we have a new superintendent, so hopefully there'll be some positive changes with Dr.
Well,
Kristen.
I just sat down with our senator a couple of days ago, and he really feels the answer is parents should be able to choose which school their kids go to. And I remember thinking, so he hasn't read any of the data about Finland where they made all schools really good. So he believes that a parent should be able to do homeschooling, charter schooling, wherever they want, they should be able to, which is pretty much killing our public schools.
Oh yeah, it is.
So it's unfortunate that we don't take more seriously educating the public.
Or educating our senators.
Well,
Thanks for trying, Sam. But that's a real thing about the whole choice. I mean, Betsy DeVos really plugs the choice, right? And to me, that's, I mean, I see the families in Flint, and I had one plaintiff.
what choice do they have?
What choice, exactly. So he was pushed out of a charter school 72 different times, never given an evaluation that was required. And so mom lost her job because she couldn't keep coming and picking him up. So in order to be able to work, she had to put him in front of a computer, virtual school. And I'm like, how's it going? She's like, it's great. I don't get called from school anymore. But it's like, what education is this? And then I talked to the little guy, and he's like, I love my friends. I miss them all. You know, how are we educating him socially to become a functioning member of our society if he's sitting in front of a virtual school?
So that to me is not a choice, but that's what they're being faced with.
It's happening in Leelanau. We have virtual school in Leelanau.
Oh, yeah.
Sutton's Bay
Mhm.
has hundreds of virtual students, I found out, and, Sutton's Bay. And I learned that this summer, and they said that they are a dominant party in this educational mode compared to the rest of the state, because there's so many children that are outcasts. They can't be in the classroom.
And that's the thing that I really struggle
But the
with.
school gets the per pupil funding,
They get
even though they're at home on the computer.
And they
Right.
spend less than a kid, you know.
But here's the thing that I'm really advocating for is there's board certified behavior analysts. There are people that know the science behind behaviors. Why aren't we getting them into the schools? I realize, and Western has one of the nationally known, Western Michigan, Central Eastern, but Western is known nationally as being one of the best. I talked with them. They said, we tried to come into Flint. We wanted to come into Flint. And we sent a letter to Lieutenant Governor Calley saying, we formed a group saying, we will bring our students in, we will make this happen. Nothing happened.
Why not?
I don't know. And now that he's not in the office, I'd love to ask him
As
personally.
a teacher who had student teachers almost every year, I mean, that was free help. That was the
Yeah.
best, yeah.
And with the BCBA, I mean, I don't understand why we're not, I mean, there is a science behind behavior that we can intervene on it with, right? And then that would alleviate the stress on the teachers, because you're not a trained behavior analyst. And doing, kids, like I was saying about the access, a wheelchair access for a kid in a wheelchair, those with behavioral issues should get a functional behavioral assessment. Functional is, why is the kid acting this way? And we need to ask, and that enables us to say, I see you struggling. How can I support you? And I'm going to give you the attention you need in order to be able to get you to function appropriately in this classroom so you're not pushed out or restrained.
Why doesn't Western Michigan try again with the new administration?
Yeah.
I mean, that may make a difference, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I hope that it does. I'm going to let Dr. Rice get in there first, because thankfully with him being from Kalamazoo, he's familiar with them. So, that would be hopeful.
So what would be your, if you could just do anything you wanted, how would these kids be best served?
I would say having more adults coming in, and I'm saying people with training, who know how to counsel kids, who understand the poverty and what they're struggling with. Our counselor ratio here in Michigan is 700 to 1.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Right, and I think the Academy of Pediatrics says like 284 to 1 is the recommended, right? So we are really out of ballpark there. But just having more human beings in the school to care for the kids.
But that costs money.
But it costs money, so therefore
They're
what
not
do?
gonna
We put them in virtual schools because we don't have the people to.
Yeah.
But if we could even, I know that school shootings and having ALICE trainings and things like that it's just the climate in which we live right now. But if kids knew that they were cared for, if they knew that they were coming to a place where they were welcomed, they were accepted, they belong, then we're not gonna have, those kids that inflicted this upon communities were those that were outcast, were pushed out, expelled, suspended. We need to make sure that kids feel like they belong in school. And if they're not, going along with everybody else, then how do we adapt to make sure that they understand that? So, and virtual schools are not the solution, because if they're coming from a home in which abuse is prevalent or neglect is prevalent, then they're even not getting those kind of resources. So, we'll keep fighting. But thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
For your support.